In this week's episode, get ready for ponies, pastiches and protests as we explore the first half of the story of Austria at Eurovision. I'm Stephen Perkins and this is Douze Points.
Hello London, we are ready for your vote.
It is Monday 6th of October and we're back with a brand new episode. Thank you very much for joining us. Apologies if I'm a little bit croaky right now, but Erica Vickman did a gig in London this weekend and I was in the audience screaming my head off. Now, let's start today's episode as we usually do with a look at the latest headlines. Obviously, the biggest story of the last fortnight is that the EBU has confirmed that it will hold a vote next month on the participation of Israel in next year's Eurovision Song Contest. 68 member countries will be invited to vote, and a simple majority of 50% is required to block Israel from competing. The pool of voters does include many countries who don't currently take part in the Eurovision Song Contest, such as Turkey and Egypt, and the vote is likely to prove divisive whatever the outcome, with Slovenia, Ireland, Netherlands and Spain having already said that they will not take part in Eurovision if Israel is involved, while Danish broadcaster DR has stated that they will not vote for any EBU member to be expelled from the competition as long as they comply with rules and regulations. Elsewhere, legendary Eurovision composer Ralph Siegel, whose works include Nicole's winning entry for Germany Ein bisschen Frieden in 1982 and Valentina Monetta and Jimmy Wilson's Spirit of the Night, which finished last in the semi-final for San Marino in 2017, has expressed a desire to return to the contest again with a new song for Germany. There's not been any official confirmation yet on how Germany will be choosing their entry for next year, but it's believed that broadcaster SWR is in charge of choosing the song, and will likely do so via a national vinyl. So if Ralph does have the song up his sleeve, he's going to need to earn his ticket to Vienna. And after this year's dramatic late withdrawal from the contest, Moldova is looking at a potential return to Eurovision in 2026. They pulled out in 2025 due to economic reasons and a lack of faith in the quality of the entries in their national selection. But broadcaster TRM, while stressing that it hasn't yet decided whether to enter the 2026 contest or not, is currently in meetings with artists and producers to consider the format of a potential national selection as well as promotion strategies and ways to support their potential entry. Let's hope they manage to find a way, as Moldova were definitely missed this year. Okay, so, as I've mentioned on the podcast previously, we quite like to start a new season with a look at the history of the host country for the next contest. This was originally planned to be our actual opening episode, but little things like pod crawls and some major breaking news got in the way. Now, at last, it's time to do a deep dive into the history of Austria at Eurovision. As you've probably noticed from the title, I'm not going to be able to do this properly in the space of one episode, so I'm splitting this one into two parts. I'll be starting with Austria's debut at the contest and taking us all the way through to 1991, which might seem like a slightly arbitrary choice of year to stop at, but I'll explain why when we get there. Let's begin with a quick overview. Austria joined the Eurovision Song Contest in 1957, which was the second ever contest, and it was one of three debuting countries that year alongside Denmark and the United Kingdom. Since then, Austria has competed in the contest 57 times, winning it on 3 occasions, finishing last on 8 of them, and scoring 0 points in 4 of those. All of their entries have been in either English or German, or a combination of the two, except for 2005, which was in English, and Spanish, and 2016, which was oddly entirely in French. The 1957 contest was, you might remember, the first time the contest had an actual scoreboard where we could see where everyone finished, and unfortunately Austria had the dubious honour of being the first country to finish at the bottom of the leaderboard. Their entry that year was Bob Martin with Wohin kleines Pony, and first of all, how can anyone not love a song called Where Little Pony? To be fair, I can see why this one was not to everyone's taste, but it was a proper earworm of a song and I loved the way he performed it. I suspect the real problem here was Austria not quite having the measure of the contest at this stage and sending something that was a little bit too childish and simplistic for a competition that fancied itself as rather sophisticated. The good news is that they seem to learn from their mistakes, and the following year they sent Liane Augustin with Die ganze Welt braucht Liebe, or The Whole World Needs Love. This one feels much more like what Eurovision was about in this era, a stirring, rousing track that makes good use of the orchestra in the way that Wohin kleines Pony didn't really. It feels like it should be played over the opening credits of a classic Hollywood movie, and I think it's aged pretty well as Eurovision entries go. They got joint 5th place this year, admittedly out of only 10 countries, but still a big step up from the previous year. As is often the case, however, success at Eurovision is not a linear path, and 1959 saw Austria sending Ferry Graf with Der K und K Calypso aus Wien, or the K&K Calypso from Vienna, a frankly quite odd song with a fairly off-putting performance to match, which finished in joint 9th place out of 11 countries. And 1960 wasn't exactly a slam dunk either. That year they were represented by Harry Winter with Du hat mich so fasziniert, or You Fascinated Me So Much, which just feels quite generic and unremarkable and finished in 7th place. place. It's a sweet song and he does do a good job with it, but it was quite hard to imagine anyone getting overly excited about it. That said, 2 of its 6 points that year did come from the UK, so clearly we saw something in it. Unfortunately, 7th place would feel like a victory compared to what was in store for Austria over the next few years. They returned to the bottom of the scoreboard in 1961 with Jimmy Makulis and Sehnsucht, or Longing. Fun fact about this one, it actually took me longer to find on YouTube than any of the others, because apparently there's a Rammstein song with the same name. This one tied with Belgium on just 1 point, and Austria ended up with back-to-back stints in last place when their 1962 entry, Nur in der Wiener Luft, or Only in the Viennese Air by Eleanor Schwartz, scored 0 points for Austria for the first time. This song was Austria's first attempt to send a bit of opera to Eurovision, and really I'm surprised it took them this long. There used to be a bit of received wisdom that opera doesn't work at Eurovision, something which arguably has been debunked by the 2 most recent winning entries, but I can't help wondering if this is where that idea all kicked off. It's not really Eleanor's fault at all, she absolutely gives it her all, and I suspect it might have just been too opera for a contest that, however fancy it perceived itself to be, was ultimately about safe, sensible, popular music. Thankfully, a gradual comeback began in 1963 with Carmela Corén and Vielleicht geschieht ein Wunder, or, to give it its much less elegant English translation, Perhaps a Miracle Will Happen. Maybe it's self-referential given Austria's track record at Eurovision at this point, but it does the trick regardless. It's a big, old-fashioned, sweeping number, and she is an incredibly charismatic and passionate performer. Plus, there's a switch to English in the lyrics towards the end, which does come as a bit of a fun surprise. She finished 7th in a field of 16, getting Austria into the top half of the scoreboard for the first time since 1957. 1964 saw the arrival of Udo Jürgens, very much the Valentina Monetta of his day, representing his country 3 years in a row and finally pulling off the seemingly impossible on the 3rd attempt. But I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. His first entry was Warum nur warum, or Why Just Why, which was a sweet slice of sad boy pop, which he performed exceptionally well. He finished 6th and clearly enjoyed the experience enough to come back again in 1965 with Sag ihr ich lass sie grüßen, or Tell Her I Said Hello, another sad boy effort and the first example I saw, since there are no surviving recordings of the 1964 contest, of just how good he is at connecting with the audience. It's a strong song too, melodic and plaintive, although I think I slightly preferred the previous one, but this one did get him all the way up to 4th place. And as you may have picked up, on his 3rd attempt in 1966, Udo Jürgens won the contest for Austria with Merci Chérie, a decisive victory too, netting almost twice as many points as Sweden in 2nd place. This is actually probably my least favourite of his 3 entries, which is not to say that it's bad, I just don't think it feels as immediate or as heartfelt as the other 2. He remains, however, one of the best to do it when it comes to making that connection with the camera. He looks right down the lens at the viewers at home, so I imagine the audience were cheering him on to win too. With their first victory under their belts, Austria hosted the 1967 contest in the festival hall of the Hofburg Palace in Vienna. Back-to-back victories were not on the cards, however, as their entry that year, Warum es 100.000 Sterne gibt, or Why There Are 100,000 Stars by Peter Horton, didn't seem to charm the juries and finished joint 14th out of 17 countries with just 2 points. For my money, I think he just didn't have as much presence as Udo did. He's good-looking and talented for sure, but the song feels quite middle of the road, and I don't think there was much in his performance to elevate it to that higher level. 1968 followed up on the numerical theme with Karel Gott's 1000 Fenster, or 1000 Windows. This one fared similarly poorly, ending up in joint 13th place with just 2 points, an outcome which kind of surprised me because it feels like quite a timeless entry that could have been entered in pretty much any decade of Eurovision and potentially done quite well. This might just have been unlucky timing for Austria, given that it is a big, sweeping ballad, and the sort of songs that scored highly that year, La 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 and Congratulations, suggest the juries were in the mood for something lighter and brighter. 1969 was the first year since their debut that Austria declined to take part in the contest, ostensibly because broadcaster ORF had not found a suitable artist that year, but rumour has it that they were not willing to participate in a contest staged in Franco-ruled Spain. They didn't come back in 1970 either, as part of a wider boycott with Finland, Norway, Portugal and Sweden, and again, depending on what reason you believe, it was either because they felt that the format of the contest was unfair to smaller countries, or that they thought the 4-way tie for the win the previous year was absolutely ludicrous. Anyway, whatever issues that Austria had with Eurovision were apparently resolved by 1971, and they returned to that year's contest in Dublin with the song Music by Marianne Wendt, finishing 16th out of the 18 countries taking part that year. I wasn't a big fan of this entry. I found it a little bit abrasive and shouty vocal-wise, although the orchestral arrangement had a lot going for it. Thankfully, better things were in store all round the following year in Edinburgh, with the milestones and Falter im Wind, or Butterflies in the Wind. The song is very 70s, although that feels like a good thing to me, because it's evidence of Austria moving with the times and trying to send some proper contemporary pop to the contest. Unlike most of Austria's entries to this point, it's guitar-led rather than being orchestral, and it's all quite low-key and charming, and they were rewarded by the juries with 5th place for that year. 1973 marked another departure for Austria from the contest, apparently due to disputes between ORF and Austrian record labels, and they must have been fairly significant because Austria didn't return to Eurovision until 1976, when they sent the duo Waterloo and Robinson with My Little World. I have a lot of love for this entry, and not just because the commentator on the version that I watched on YouTube kept calling them Waterloo and Robinson. It's the first entry for Austria at Eurovision performed entirely in English, and yes, it is so cheesy you could make fondue with it, but there's something so incredibly charming about the whole performance. It's an incredibly catchy song, so if you're planning to check out any of these tracks after the podcast, I warn you now, there is a strong chance this one will be stuck in your head all day. The jury seemed to warm to it anyway because they finished in 5th place again. 1977 saw Austria attempting something a bit satirical when they sent the group Schmetterlinge with the track Boom Boom Boomerang. The composers of this track were not so subtly making fun of all the Eurovision winning songs with titles that were just a bunch of noises like La La La, Boom Bang a Bang, Ding a Dong, and so on. I'm not saying this criticism wasn't valid, but I think it may have come several decades too early. This was still an era where Eurovision didn't necessarily have a sense of humour about itself, and as a result, this one finished in 17th place. 1978 was another year in which Austria's entry didn't make much of an impact, with Springtime's Mrs. Caroline Robinson, a pleasant but fairly forgettable ditty, only making it to 15th place. But there was a bit of a change of tack for the 1979 contest when Austria sent a topical entry in Christina Simon's Heute in Jerusalem, or Today in Jerusalem. The contest that year was, of course, held in Jerusalem following Israel's win in 1978, and the song was a call for peace. One that ended up feeling particularly on the nose, as the contest was held just 5 days after the Egypt-Israel peace treaty was signed. It was quite a cool, bluesy track, and she did sing it well, but the voters were distinctly unmoved, and it finished in joint last place with just 5 points. So, 1980 saw a return to more familiar territory with the extremely wholesome group Blue Danube and the track Du bist Musik, or You Are Music, a disco-y track with lyrics which involve them just mostly naming lots of composers and genres. It's very cheesy but kind of appealing and earned them a respectable 8th place. One of the members of Blue Danube, Marty Brem, then returned as a solo artist the following year with Wenn du da bist, or When You Are There, a sweet and sincere song which has some of the most peculiar staging I've seen at Eurovision for this era. He's surrounded by 4 female backing singers/dancers who are executing some slow-mo choreography that isn't quite in sync, and they're in very strange costumes. One of them is wearing a leotard and an American football helmet. Clearly the juries were a bit baffled too, as this one only finished 17th. The 1982 entry is possibly my favourite one that we're covering in this podcast. This was a husband and wife duo called Mess with Sonntag or Sunday. It's a really jolly performance with colourful outfits and choreography, although the vocals are oddly quiet in the sound mixing. It's a delightful entry that would be top tier for me even by itself, but what truly elevates it to legendary status is that not only did it win that year's Austrian national final by a landslide, but the fact that the 2 performers in the group, Fritz and Lizzie Engstler, had also entered the national final as soloists that same year, meaning that between them they made up a full quarter of the entrants. Absolutely iconic behaviour. I can't believe they only finished 9th at Eurovision. Absolute robbery. 1983's entry is also interesting for being the birth of a bit of an Austrian Eurovision legend. This year the entry was West End with Hurricane, which I'm sure you'll agree is the best song with that title ever to enter the contest. They're a very chirpy Kids from Fame vibes group with a nice staging gimmick in that they have a female dancer in a big swishy skirt who does a lot of twirls while wind noise plays in the track. In and of itself, this isn't anything hugely remarkable. It finished 9th again, but one of the members is Gary Lux, who would go on to represent Austria at Eurovision 5 more times in various capacities, twice as a soloist and 3 more times as a backing singer. Indeed, he was involved in the next 2 Eurovision entries for Austria. In 1984, he was the backing singer for Anita with Einfach Weg, or Just Gone, a sad synthy song which I rather liked, but which finished in last place with 5 points. Then, in 1985, Gary himself was the Austrian entry with Kinder dieser Welt, or Children of This World. His hair was a lot more buffonty by this point, and I kind of preferred it the way it was before, but the song itself is a decent effort. It feels very 80s Eurovision in that it is a wholesome track about creating a better future for the kids, and it finished in 8th place. Gary took a year off in 1986 when Austria was represented by Tim Nebrauer with Die Zeit ist einsam, or Time is Lonely, a classic ballad that seems to have slightly Jim Steinman-esque aspirations but never quite goes hard enough to truly pull it off, sadly, and finished in 18th place. Then in 1987, Gary returned for his second and final stint as the named artist for Austria with a moody ballad called Nur noch Gefühl, or Just Feeling. He's even dressed all in black and looking very serious, and his hair might be even more vertical than it was in 1985 as well. Unfortunately, the song is a bit of a snooze, and he has a vocal crack near the end when he goes for one of the higher notes. This one sadly only made 20th place in the final tally. 1988 saw Austria's second null pointer with Wilfried's Lisa Mona Lisa, a bit of a strange performance that feels like it should be a huge rock ballad but just comes across as strangely half-hearted and underpowered. It feels like an odd fit for Wilfried as a singer, which is particularly strange given that he wrote it himself. Really, the most impressive thing about this is the height of the shoulder pads on his backing singer. In 1989, Austria sent Thomas Forschner, who, let me say this right off the bat, was so insanely hot that he could even look good in an ill-fitting powder purple tuxedo. His song was Nur ein Lied, or Just a Song, and it didn't mess around, with a striking opening that feels like it could have been the continuity sting for a 1980s TV channel, and quickly evolved into a stirring, moody ballad. It finished in 5th place, which was Austria's best result in over a decade. 1990 was a year where many countries couldn't resist sending songs about the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Austria was no exception, with Simone's Keine Mauern mehr, or No More Walls. Again, this feels classically 1990s Eurovision in that it is a sexy lady in a short skirt singing a plea for world peace and tolerance, but it is a pretty catchy effort, and it finished in 10th place overall. Buoyed by their recent relative successes, Austria hoped that lightning might strike twice by sending Thomas Forschner to Rome in 1991, although sadly this time he'd done a kind of reverse Samson by growing his hair into a more distinct mullet, which slightly diminished his powers of hotness, and he was once again burdened with a ridiculous outfit, a midnight blue ensemble with a sequined bolero jacket. Sadly, Thomas would probably have been better off leaving his Eurovision stint as a one and done, because his entry this time, Venedig im Regen, or Venice in the Rain, did not appeal to the juries, and it got 0 points for Austria for the 3rd time. I don't think it particularly deserved that result, because it's quite a nice song, and he's a pretty charming performer, but, sometimes the juries at Eurovision just respond in very unpredictable ways. And that's where I'm going to stop for now, ending on a note of tragedy rather than triumph, but don't fret. Next time we're going to do the second half of Austria's Eurovision story, including 2 more wins, 1 more null point that by a quirk of tie-breaking rules manages not to be a last place finish, and some absolute bangers from the last 10 years. So I hope you're going to join me for that one. In the meantime, please do hit subscribe on your podcast platform of choice if you haven't done so already, to make sure you don't miss any of our future episodes. And if you think we've earned it, if you'd like to leave us a 5-star review while you're there, we'd very much appreciate that, as it helps us to climb up those podcast charts and reach even more listeners. Until next time, good night Europe and good morning Australia.